My name is Eddie Ahn. I am the Executive Director of Brightline Defense, which is a public policy nonprofit based in San Francisco. I have a bet going on with John, first of all, that I'd like to settle right now. How many Asians are in the room? Nobody. So the bet was, if there was one other Asian in the room, I would get $100. Is there a half Asian in the room? Yeah? Thank you. We'll split it down the middle then. So look, you're probably asking yourself, what is an Asian kid coming out from San Francisco telling us about local hire? And I will tell you first and foremost, Brightline is a very grassroots-oriented nonprofit. A lot of our work has come from working in neighborhoods within San Francisco. Is anyone here familiar with San Francisco? Maybe a show of hands. Okay, so quite a few folk. Bayview Hunters Point, which is predominantly African-American community, the southeast sector of the city, is the area in which we've worked with a long time. For us, we don't pretend to be, born and raised in the community. Our whole thing is working with community leaders who have been there for decades, helping to say shut down power plants. That was our first campaign. There were fossil fuel power plants located in Petro Hill that was polluting on the southeast corner of the city. And at the time, the city wanted to build new power plants. And our skill set was blending the legal, policy research, and advocacy to help shut those down for good in 2010. From there on out, it became about solar, expanding solar and making sure that communities can become cleaner, healthier as a result. And then from that became the struggle of local hire, which is the idea of if we're installing solar on a rooftop, or if we're doing residential construction or commercial construction, and communities around them are being impacted, those jobs should be guaranteed for local residents. And not just job training, and that's one of the things I'll talk about consistently throughout this presentation, is that our belief is not just training for training's sake. There's nothing worse than training up for a job that doesn't exist at the end of the rainbow, the training rainbow, so to speak. It's about jobs and jobs now, making sure that there's placement. So, describing that work, we've actually been funded by the Cerna Foundation in New York City to go to different cities. We've worked in, so in San Francisco, I'll describe that local hire struggle a little more later, but we've worked in multiple cities, Baltimore, Seattle, more recently with Labor's Local 55, the city of Newark, with Dwayne Richardson in the back, Jersey City, and Wilmington has been a touch point for us in the past, but this is probably the first serious effort I've come before the community to help with some of the understandings between three components of local hire: the community component, the legal component, and the policy component. So why local hire? I think there's an instinctive feel in this room for the value of local hire, that it means that residents who are impacted by economic development coming down the pipeline get those jobs, those community benefits that are really important. But it's understanding that it's an organizer's term of art, that there are different ways to describe it. Some people call it local hiring, some people call it targeted hire. But basically, it's getting unemployed, underemployed communities jobs. And it's a lever. It's not a silver bullet to poverty, of course, but it's a lever to get jobs for folks who face high unemployment, high crime rates, to lift communities out of poverty over the long run. And part of it is looking at what can be connected to local hire. So in San Francisco, for the longest time, from the community angle, there was a good faith effort on the books, meaning that with public works projects, any project really, there were multiple different policies tied to it, but the requirement in quotation marks, was that you would use a good faith effort to hire someone from the local community. Now, if a private employer comes up to you and says, I'm gonna hire you on a good faith basis, or I'm gonna make a good faith effort to hire you, most people would not be holding their breath for a job. I think at the end of the day, the private sector is going to do what it wants to do, which is why regulatory action and legal action over the long run has been very helpful in shaping the private sector to be better actors. And this is all not to say, of course, the private sector is inherently bad or anything like that, but there are incentives you can structure in law to help push people toward better outcomes over the long run. So in that community dynamic, what had happened for decades with good faith efforts was a number of folks were frustrated. The community partners that Brightline works with, Aboriginal Black Men United, ABU, which was a community group that went from construction site to construction site and shut sites down. based on whether jobs are getting channeled toward their members. There were other groups like Chinese for Affirmative Action, the A. Philip Randolph Institute of San Francisco, and finally Labor's Local 261, which was always a strong labor partner for the community in the Bay Area. And bringing these assets together and these organizations together helped create a drive towards something called mandatory local hire, which was the idea that we're not going to use a good faith effort anymore. So in terms of overall policy, it was 50% of work hours should be channeled toward local residents. Use a good faith effort for that. What it meant in actuality, and when the data was actually collected, it ended up only being 19 to 20% local hire, which shows the failure of good faith. And in fact, that was the name of the report that was created by Brightline and Chinese for Affirmative Action to show the statistical failure, the system level failure that had occurred, and create legislation through a champion known as Supervisor John Avalos. Supervisor in San Francisco is roughly the equivalent of a city council person. But Supervisor John Avalos then championed this law with a number of community groups to create a very structured, targeted hiring law that said, we're going to set the base floor at 20%, increase it 5% each year, and if you don't meet those goals, we're going to start penalizing you. As you can imagine, it was a ferocious struggle. A lot of folks didn't want it. They thought it was too controversial. And in describing the policy, they said it couldn't be done. The constant refrain is there's not enough local qualified workers when doing local hire. But if folks are getting trained up all the time, you think about it, how is that possible if you're always spending training dollars and you don't have enough local qualified workers? So part of it was just tying the two together, the policy design and the workforce development system, the job training system, to make them work together better. The third and final component that I haven't talked about yet is the legal component. And it's early in the morning. I don't want to get too much into federal constitutional law, but just understand that usually the objection to local hire is that there are federal constitutional concerns. There's three of them. There's the Privileges and Immunities Clause, the Commerce Clause, and finally the Equal Protection Clause. And if you want more detail beyond that, I'll happily talk to you after this presentation. But what had happened originally was community organizers will often come to the steps of City Hall demanding for stronger local hire, and all it would take is a city bureaucrat or a city deputy attorney to say, no, no, there's case law, it's illegal, it's unconstitutional. You don't even have to get into the constitutional grounds, because that's enough to stop, unfortunately, the organizer, most of the time at least, in their tracks, because there's no legal knowledge. And I'll self-hate for a moment, even though I'm a lawyer myself. The one thing I hate about the law is that its ability to create inertia and also its ability to tell people what they can't do at times. And that's frustrating to me personally, and it's partially why I do what I do, to create space for change, hopefully, and progressive reform over the long run. I'm trying to decide whether to go more into the legal implications, but maybe I'll save that for a specific question or two at the end. But Brightline's value add at the end of the day was providing a case law that showed how a constitutionally sound law could be crafted. And it was using that case law that ended up being the basis for writing the legislation itself. And for us, when we passed it through Supervisor Avalos in 2010, it then turned to the mayor at the time, Mayor Ed Lee, to wholly commit to implementing the law across 6 contracting departments. And since then, it's been a wild success. Fast forward from 2010 to now, roughly 6-7 years later, the stats have gone from 20% to now roughly 41 to 45% local hire. And it wouldn't have happened without, again, like Brightline, we are not a service provider at the end of the day. Our role is simply one of advocates. It would not have happened without the buy-in of so many different stakeholders, including private stakeholders at the time, in the negotiations, the legislative negotiations that happened, that realized that this was an incredible value to the city, to the community, that had been ignored so often in economic development cycles. And for us, at the end of the day, we really wanted to make this all work together. And so there were a number of other pieces that were moving forward. And maybe the final piece I'll talk about is one of apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship. That at the time, there was a pre-apprenticeship program just starting up called City Build Academy. And it became the go-to spot of workforce development in the city. And there are a number of community-based organizations around it that helped feed into that pre-apprenticeship program. So it's either a 9-week training course or an 18-week training course of job readiness skills. And then it offers direct entry or direct interview, one of the two, into multiple trades. So then you can get into an apprenticeship and make sure that you have that career pathway, those good paying jobs ultimately, that get you into the middle class. So for us at the end of the day, it was about building those steps through, this has been done in multiple different ways in other cities, but a city approved training program that can ultimately create those jobs, that consistency, so that the excuse, no local qualified workers, doesn't exist anymore. So that's it in terms of presentation right now, and I'd be happy to take any more questions. Yes, sir.
Yeah, if you have a state, a county, or a city where you don't have the votes to get what you're saying passed, what strategies would you use to bring about that change?
Community organizing is an essential part of local hire. And one thing I didn't mention actually was there are different approaches to local hire to take into consideration. So there's a legislative approach, which I've mostly described, and that's San Francisco's approach. But you can do it, say, through a project labor agreement, which perhaps that can be helpful if you have enough allies, labor partners, for instance, together pushing for the same thing without necessarily the community boots on the ground. Another potential is community benefits agreements, but that usually requires an extensive community coalition to basically try to directly negotiate with the developer what jobs you want, what direct economic benefits you're going to get for the community. And that takes like a high level of attention. Usually it's helpful to have a number of different stakeholders together, government, the city, maybe a progressive private stakeholder or two, having all those different coalition elements rather than just strictly rely